Course of her life, she was groomed to be a victim of her mother in the presentation of this grand con, which is presenting her as a victim of cancer and multiple other ailments. Gypsy endured having her salivary glands removed. She had a feeding tube. She wasn't allowed to have food. Her mother got her addicted to opiates. And then also restrained her from seeking freedom. And she actually had convinced family and friends and outsiders that Gypsy could not walk. So basically, her mother imprisoned her, and Gypsy said it best, it was a kill or be killed situation of the imprisonment she faced. I remember Gypsy, we had discussed that CPS came to your house at one point.
Mhm.
Remind
They
me about that. Yeah, tell us about that.
So they did come to my house, and basically they were asking me the wrong questions. So they're like, show me your arm, show me your legs, and they were checking for bruises. And at that point, my mom never hit me. They wasn't asking the right questions to me.
Gypsy Rose Blanchard is known as the infamous woman who successfully plotted the demise of her own mother. Blanchard committed the heinous act of matricide and spent 8.5 years of a 10-year sentence at the Chillicothe Women's Prison in Missouri. You'd think that would be the end of Gypsy Rose in the limelight. You'd think after having her crime story made into numerous documentaries and a popular Hulu TV series, that Gypsy would go quietly away, that she would be desperate to fade into the woodwork and live a drama-free life. But that's not what happened. The convicted felon decided to go full throttle into the limelight, trying to sell herself as this transformed criminal who morphed into a victim and survivor, a role model for young women, an advocate working tirelessly for prison reform and for abused kids everywhere. Well, that was the plan anyway. A plan that was born many, many years before Gypsy ever knew her parole date. Somewhere along the line, someone sold Gypsy on this idea that she wasn't a criminal at all, and she definitely didn't deserve any prison time. Welcome to Becca Scoops. My partner is a veteran detective, and I'm Becca, a former psych and ICU RN. And we have investigated the mystery woman who is behind Gypsy's disturbing plans. The woman who single-handedly molded Gypsy Rose for several years, Melissa Moore. In one article, Moore says it's her fault Gypsy Rose Blanchard had become a viral sensation after she got released from prison. You'll come to see how Melissa was instrumental in pushing Gypsy's alleged lies about the crime, including about the victim Dee Dee Blanchard and Gypsy's co-defendant Nicholas Godejohn. In fact, the untruths about Dee Dee Blanchard and Nick Godejohn in Gypsy's book that Melissa co-authored left us speechless. Melissa is also a huge believer that Gypsy's prison sentence was utterly unjust, and Moore's behind-the-scenes antics shocked us. It's downright disturbing and appears to come from a place of pure greed. She's seeking fame and celebrity for herself. But before we get ahead of ourselves, who is Melissa Moore? Well, Melissa G. Moore popped on the Hollywood scene over 10 years ago as the daughter of the notorious Happy Face serial killer. Here's a report from 2013.
Front tonight, Melissa Moore. Her father, Keith Jesperson, is the serial murderer known as the Happy Face Killer. He killed at least 8 women, signed his anonymous confession letters with a smiley face. He's currently serving life sentences in prison. But of course, you saw him there with her when she was just a little girl. Melissa, thank you so much for coming out front and talking to us tonight. You just heard Angie, Ariel Castro's daughter, say, "We don't have monster in our blood."
Melissa used her status as the daughter of an infamous serial killer to launch her career after she got involved with Dr. Phil and Oprah.
It took me about a year after meeting you to get my head around that. The denial was so thick. I just could see the memories that we had as him as my father. I couldn't see the actions, the heinous actions that he committed. I just couldn't wrap my head around it. It was just too big for me.
Yeah, but you knew about all of the crimes. You were aware of all 8 of the crimes.
I was aware of them, but to me it seemed almost like a fictional story.
Moore's podcast, Happy Face, about her father ran for 2 seasons from 2018 to 2020. It was well received, and up until that point, Melissa had been seeking her big break in the true crime genre, without any luck. Reports are after Dr. Phil felt sorry for Moore, she landed a modest gig as a correspondent on the Dr. Oz show. But that wasn't enough. She began looking for something to really catapult her Hollywood career to the next level. That's when Moore claims, after watching HBO's documentary about Gypsy, Mommy Dead and Dearest, she reached out to Blanchard in prison, hoping to talk Blanchard into some type of project. Gypsy turned her down at first.
It was about 7 years ago after Aaron Lee Carr's incredible documentary on HBO, Mommy Dead and Dearest. And I remember watching that and being completely fascinated by Gypsy's case. And that was Aaron did a great job of showing the beginning of Gypsy's story. And so I went to Chillicothe, the prison, to meet with Gypsy, and I asked her if I could do an interview at the time I was working for a daytime talk show, and she declined the interview. But we had a fabulous conversation.
However, things soon changed. Gypsy's ebook titled Released: Conversations on the Edge of Freedom was co-authored by Melissa Moore. In it, Moore claims for over 5 years she spoke to Gypsy weekly for 30 to 45 minutes. The book is a compilation of their prison phone conversation and is an eye-opener. Moore's relationship with Gypsy became so toxic. In fact, Moore's professionalism went straight out the door. What is deeply disturbing is the role Moore played and continues to play in shaping Gypsy's false narrative and her disturbing plans to become an influencer and mommy vlogger. Remember, Moore had started out in this as a journalist investigating Gypsy. In fact, she admitted she got Gypsy's medical records and claims to know more about Gypsy's health issues than Blanchard herself.
One of the things while doing this documentary was actually getting access to her medical records. So I've probably seen more of the medical records than even Gypsy has on her case, which I'm, wanting to share with Gypsy now.
Her not knowing like her first surgery was actually before the age of 1. Even her grandfather's response, to her accusation of abuse with him. How did you decide, how to share those moments with her, on camera?
I knew she wanted to know her medical history. It was very shocking to go through her records. I was finding receipts and finding documentation, like a bone marrow transplant. And I was like, wow.
Gypsy never had a bone marrow transplant. That's just an alleged blatant lie. Additionally, Moore nor Blanchard never mentioned Gypsy's real medical issue in the book or anywhere else. Moore claims she has all of Gypsy's medical records, but ignores the fact that Gypsy has a rare chromosomal disorder that can explain all of her medical procedures. Remember, Gypsy Rose's defense for plotting her mother's demise was the allegation that Dee Dee Blanchard was medically abusing her. That Dee Dee was suffering from Munchausen by proxy and had talked to doctors into 30 unwarranted surgeries.
How many surgeries did you have?
So many.
10, 20?
I'm pretty sure 30 more. Because I had multiple eye muscle surgeries, multiple leg surgeries, multiple throat surgeries. I don't have salivary glands. Not these anymore because they were removed.
Gypsy had nowhere near 30 unwarranted surgeries, and the few she did have, according to her own diagram, we counted 4 procedures, were all allegedly tied to her rare chromosomal disorder. Gypsy does not deny the chromosomal disorder. She has acknowledged on social media she indeed suffers from this genetic microdeletion. But Gypsy downplays the rare disorder and won't recognize it in any major interviews. This point is pivotal. To acknowledge the rare disorder would be utterly detrimental to Gypsy's narrative that her mom had Munchausen by proxy, and that's why Gypsy had no choice but to plot her demise. Additionally, Melissa Moore either ignores Gypsy's chromosomal disorder or she is entirely incompetent as an investigative journalist. That's either sloppy investigative journalism or Moore is all on board the Gypsy train to sell this false narrative that Dee Dee Blanchard had Munchausen by proxy. But that's not all. Moore also pushes the false claim that Gypsy had no choice but to murder her mother. She claims that for Gypsy it was, quote, kill or be killed, end quote.
So basically, her mother imprisoned her, and Gypsy said at best it was a kill or be killed situation of the imprisonment she faced.
Well, it's been documented that Dee Dee Blanchard posed no real threat to Gypsy Rose. In fact, it's well documented that Dee Dee was quite ill at the time of her demise. Dee Dee Blanchard never made Gypsy Rose ill and was never diagnosed with Munchausen by proxy. Dee Dee was a con woman, pulling a medical con. In fact, Gypsy revealed there was no kill or be killed situation. Gypsy explained she did not want to wait for her mom to die to get away from her.
I'm like, well, I can just wait till she passes away naturally, but I didn't know how long that was going to be. She could have lived to be 70 years old, and by that time I would be too old to do the things that I would want, like have children and have a life of my own.
Moore also makes the other wild accusation by claiming Gypsy wasn't allowed to eat regular food by mouth, and Dee Dee got Gypsy addicted to narcotics and then restrained her from seeking freedom.
Wasn't allowed to have food. Her mother got her addicted to opiates, and then also restrained her from seeking freedom.
As a survivor of relentless child abuse, this docuseries chronicles my quest to expose the hidden parts of my life that have never been revealed until now.
My mother claimed that I was sick.
These are totally unfounded accusations. Is Moore really believing whatever Gypsy tells her at face value without doing any investigative work? You decide. In the co-authored ebook, Gypsy writes, quote, "My feeding tube was used strictly to administer me water, liquid nutrition, supplements, and medication." She adds, "When I go to county jail, I weighed 92 pounds due to a daily menu of Pediasure and other electrolyte drinks." Well, the suggestion here is that Gypsy was so underweight due to this claim that Dee Dee forbid her eating food by mouth. The only problem is weighing 92 pounds when you're 4'11" is a healthy weight. According to medical professionals, 86 to 105 pounds is completely normal. Moore backs this up by claiming the first real food Gypsy ever tasted was prison food.
Eating real food, different foods, like, she was eating prison food for the first time. That was her first taste of real food. It's prison food.
We also know Gypsy gushed about getting a sugar high at Disney World thanks to all the sugary foods she ingested, and there's video of her eating royal mashed potatoes, not to mention the video of her eating brownies right after the crime.
I got to go to Magic Kingdom, and I went and danced the waltz with Prince Charming and Cinderella.
Really?
That was really fun. My mom and I got the Disney dining plan, which is unlimited food.
Okay.
A human being cannot eat this much food.
Too much food?
And we went and eat at Chef Mickey's. I had way too much sugar.
We also witnessed Gypsy downing a sandwich without any problems right after she was arrested. Did Melissa Moore miss these examples of Gypsy taking food by mouth? But that's not all. Melissa makes another wild accusation against Dee Dee Blanchard.
She became addicted to pain medication and how her mom leveraged that addiction to keep her hostage.
There is no evidence Gypsy was addicted to opiates. In fact, we know Gypsy was taken to the hospital right after her arrest, where she waited hours and hours in the ER, and if she had an opiate addiction, it would have been found in the blood work. It was not. We also see Gypsy after waiting for over 20 hours and then being interrogated, and she is demonstrating no signs or symptoms of an opiate addiction. At this point, she would have been going through major withdrawals. Additionally, Moore claimed that Gypsy's dental issues were a result of Dee Dee Blanchard's Munchausen by proxy, and specifically, quote, all these surgeries her mother inflicted on her, end quote.
There's a moment that she chose to share, which is when she removes her dentures. And she shows the aftermath of all of these surgeries that her mother inflicted on her. And
Gypsy's teeth issues started long before Dee Dee Blanchard ever started the medical con, because that's what this was, a medical con. Dee Dee Blanchard was never diagnosed with Munchausen by proxy. In fact, forensic psychologist Dr. John Mathias from the YouTube channel Hidden True Crime explained Dee Dee did not meet the diagnostic criteria for Munchausen by proxy.
Need to occur in the absence of obvious external rewards. They don't. Dee Dee is clearly doing this for external rewards and for external gain, right? And so, in that sense, technically speaking, Gypsy Rose doesn't even meet criteria for factitious disorder imposed on another.
Dee Dee had a history of writing bad checks and shoplifting. In fact, Gypsy wrote about her mom's cons and shoplifting in the ebook. Quote, "The wheelchair is an obvious example, but my mother also taught me at a very young age how to shoplift. Sitting in a wheelchair helps to more easily knock items into your lap and shove them under your princess dress. We'd steal random stuff at Hobby Lobby." Dee Dee ran cons. Dee Dee shoplifted. Dee Dee had a history of this type of criminal behavior, which perfectly aligns with the known cons like claiming Gypsy had leukemia and muscular dystrophy to obtain Make-A-Wish trips and the Habitat for Humanity house. Dee Dee was running a medical con, and that's what her history aligns with, not Munchausen by proxy. However, Dee Dee was telling the truth when she told friends and family that Gypsy had been diagnosed with a chromosomal disorder, and that doctors were somewhat baffled by it. Didn't Melissa Moore dig into the medical records and see the diagnosis of the rare chromosomal disorder? Didn't she watch Gypsy's interrogation video, which reveals she was eating food and going on wonderful vacations? To recap, we know Melissa Moore claims to be an Emmy-nominated investigative journalist. We know she spent over 5 years going over Gypsy's entire case and speaking to Gypsy weekly from about 2019. We know she had all the medical records. Yet, we see Moore spewing unfounded accusations like Gypsy had to kill Dee Dee or she would be killed. Dee Dee got Gypsy addicted to opiates to control her, and Gypsy's first taste of real food was in prison. Spewing unfounded accusations that are so easily disproven reeks of something hinky going on behind the scenes. But before we get to that, Gypsy, while in cahoots with Melissa Moore, also pushed a very troubling narrative about Nicholas Godejohn. Most of you know Nicholas Godejohn was Gypsy Rose's internet boyfriend who was manipulated by Blanchard to aid her with her mother's demise. Nick was diagnosed with autism. In fact, Nick's autism was so profound, he was placed on permanent disability by the government. Nick got a life sentence with no possibility of parole, while Gypsy took a sweet plea deal, thanks to this false narrative, still being spewed by Hollywood journalists like Melissa Moore. What makes matters worse is Gypsy and Melissa Moore's ebook, which describes Nick as, quote, hailing from Big Bend, Wisconsin, Godejohn had a criminal record for indecent exposure and had a history of mental illness. They added, he soon turned the pair's virtual relationship into one steeped in BDSM, end quote. Nowhere in the book do they mention Nick had autism and was on permanent disability. How could Melissa Moore omit those extremely crucial facts from her reporting? It just boggles the mind. Instead, Melissa Moore allows Gypsy to paint Godejohn as a pervert. They also accuse him of being a narcissist and make fraudulent claims about his criminal record. This allegation of indecent exposure is a blatant lie. Nick is autistic, and according to Dr. Theodore Wasserman, an expert on autism who assessed Godejohn at length, Nick has issues in social settings. He was at a McDonald's for hours and hours updating his computer. Long story short, at some point, he watched some sexual videos. A manager saw it and called the cops. The outcome? Well, the cops said Nick admitted he had watched some inappropriate videos, and yes, he had been loitering for hours. He also had a pocket knife on him. He was charged with disorderly conduct and carrying a concealed weapon, not indecent exposure. The cops checked out his computer's watch history and didn't find anything alarming. They let him go that same day. It wasn't that big of a deal. Again, Melissa Moore fails to do her job fact-checking this story and ends up defaming a disabled man who has an IQ of 82, which is classified as impaired. This is exactly how Gypsy was able to get credibility with the mainstream media coming out of prison. This so-called investigative journalist, Melissa Moore, had vetted Gypsy, had even co-authored a book with her. The mainstream media took that as proof that everything Gypsy said was truth. And according to Gypsy and Melissa Moore, Nick was this big, bad, aggressive monster, and Gypsy was this frail, virginal girl who he took advantage of. When it's the opposite. Nick was the one with a disability, which made him extremely suggestible and easily manipulated. Nick was not diagnosed with a mental illness. He has autism. We also know Gypsy was into BDSM and role-playing long before she met Nicholas Godejohn. Gypsy describes her first boyfriend in the ebook, who most believe is this man named Dan Glidewell. Gypsy admits she wasn't a virgin when she met Nick, although that's what she told Godejohn. Gypsy's first lover testified under oath that she introduced him to BDSM role-playing. This was before she met Nicholas Godejohn. Gypsy had many sexual personas on social media. She writes, "Back when I was 20, the only way I would feel good about myself was by taking my clothes off online for these perverts. I have very nice boobs. I'd wear a wig and I would have my dentures in. I wouldn't be hooked up to machines and I'd hide my feeding tube, showing off my body. I got compliments, and that reinforced my behavior. When I really hated myself, I just numbed myself with my mother's prescription narcotics. I was really harming myself physically and emotionally." Gypsy was never hooked up to machines, and here she admits to having easy access to social media where she engaged in taking her clothes off for men. However, we are supposed to believe it was Nick who introduced Gypsy into the BDSM world and role-playing. This just doesn't add up. However, one of the most disturbing aspects of Melissa Moore and her lack of insight into Gypsy's crime is this notion Moore holds that Gypsy's incarceration was unjust and she had no business serving any prison time.
Her 10-year prison sentence for second degree, of which I think she served 8.5 years.
Correct. Yeah.
Was that just?
I personally don't believe so, and I know everybody has a different opinion. The scale of justice did her wrong, but they're hoping that the scale of life does her right.
Mm-hmm.
Melissa Moore also admits she coached Gypsy to ensure she got paroled.
And I remember that we would sit on the phone and kind of go over some questions we thought they would ask you, the parole board.
Yeah, I remember that.
When Gypsy informed Melissa Moore she made parole and would be released on December 28th, 2023, Moore immediately began compiling the ebook and pitched the Lifetime series. Finally, all her efforts, the weekly prison phone calls, and gaining Gypsy's trust would pay off big time. It's interesting that Moore, whose father was a serial killer, would prioritize spending years engaging with another heinous murderer and publicly putting her on a pedestal. Moore was smart enough to know in order to sell Gypsy to the public, it was imperative she be viewed as a victim and survivor of Munchausen by proxy. Part of that narrative was claiming Christy Blanchard, Gypsy's stepmother, discovered this key piece of evidence, a doctor's prescription pad inside the home Gypsy and Dee Dee shared.
What I loved about Christy is that she's always been an advocate for Gypsy and a non-judgmental advocate. She was the one who found in Dee Dee's house the medical pad, that the prescription pad. And she's the one who started to see that this was something bigger than any of us could imagine.
The connotation here from Moore is that Christy somehow cracked this case wide open, proving Dee Dee had Munchausen by proxy. However, a random prescription pad, while troubling, points to theft. and possibly a drug addiction, not Munchausen by proxy. And the idea that Christie found any evidence when the entire home was a major crime scene and had been inventoried smacks of another alleged lie. Again, is Moore that clueless? By her own admission, she spent thousands of hours speaking to Gypsy and investigating this case. Yet, she had turned a blind eye and has no objectivity. She is clearly just a Blanchard spokesperson pushing a narrative that is easily disproven. Moore wrote about herself that she was, quote, a respected voice in investigative journalism. She added that she, quote, played a crucial role in solving complex real-life cases, end quote. Another medical anomaly Moore could have easily disproven surrounds this salivary gland removal. In the ebook, it says, quote, mother numbed gums to make her drool and her teeth decayed, end quote. Moore's claim here is that Gypsy's teeth decayed after Dee Dee numbed Gypsy's gums to make her drool, and that's how Dee Dee tricked doctors to have Gypsy's salivary glands removed.
One thing that she did tell me is that there's a moment that she chose to share, which is when she removes her dentures. And she shows the aftermath of all of these surgeries that her mother inflicted on her.
This procedure to remove some of Gypsy's salivary glands can also be traced back to Gypsy's rare disorder. In other words, no doctor was tricked, allegedly. Gypsy needed the procedure. In fact, the mouth has 600 to 1,000 salivary glands. Humans have 3 pairs of major salivary glands and 600 to 1,000 minor salivary glands. Gypsy has saliva regardless of having a few salivary glands removed. This salivary gland removal did not cause her teeth to decay. Again, Gypsy has saliva. Another red flag Moore should have caught as an investigative journalist who was co-authoring a book with Gypsy surrounds this claim Dee Dee had schizophrenia. Gypsy writes, growing up with a mom who had schizophrenia, who saw shapes and shadows and heard voices, I felt like my mom had a judgment of me when she would be listening to the voices in her head. When my mother put me in vacation Bible school, where she'd work as a volunteer, she bought plastic mini statues of the saints, like St. Joseph and St. Agnes, etc., end quote. Gypsy's describing paranoid schizophrenia, and it's a crazy accusation to make. If Dee Dee suffered from paranoid schizophrenia, it would not go unnoticed, and Dee Dee could not have kept up the medical con. According to Dee Dee's autopsy that includes her medical records, she was never diagnosed with schizophrenia. Gypsy describes Dee Dee taking her to vacation Bible school, where Dee Dee also volunteered. This doesn't square with Gypsy and Melissa Moore's picture that Gypsy was held hostage and drugged, or that Dee Dee had schizophrenia. Spending a week as a volunteer at a vacation Bible school would have exposed Dee Dee's alleged schizophrenia. Additionally, Dee Dee and Gypsy traveled extensively, had multiple vacation and many outings, attended numerous sci-fi conventions. Gypsy was not held hostage in her home as she wants people to believe. Of course, Moore wasn't investing all this time talking to Gypsy Rose in prison for nothing. She had a plan. If she could befriend Gypsy and become Gypsy's echo chamber, she could then turn that relationship, a totally unprofessional relationship, into book deals. She would co-author, along with the coveted Lifetime series. This would be Melissa Moore's big break as a major Hollywood true crime player and a potential cash cow for the daughter of the happy face killer. In fact, Moore's relationship with Gypsy crossed the professional lines. Moore admitted she didn't want Gypsy to get married. Moore wanted utter control. She had a vision for the Lifetime series, and that was for Gypsy to become this hero for Gen Z women on TikTok, an advocate and an influencer. Moore feared she lost control of Gypsy when she got married.
I learned a big lesson as a filmmaker, and that is that for me, I got really attached. I saw a vision for Gypsy that maybe wasn't her own vision, but I had a vision for Gypsy that she was going to walk out of prison, go into the safety and security of her parents' arms, and have this relationship that she never got with her parents, and that she was going to discover who she is, explore freedoms for the first time, riding a bike, driving a car, eating real food, different foods. Like, she was eating prison food for the first time. That was her first taste of real food. It's prison food. So
I ruined her vision. I did. Just because we got married and to a wrench in her plans.
It's okay though.
In one interview, Moore said, quote, "Actually, we didn't talk for about 30 days. When she broke the news to me that she was getting married, I was taken aback, and I told her that I honestly felt that she was making a mistake." End quote. Moore got her big break with Gypsy Rose. According to her own bio that she wrote about herself, she said, quote, "Moore was the creator and executive producer of The Prison Confessions of Gypsy Rose Blanchard, where she dove into the complex aftermath of one of the most infamous murder cases in recent memory. Debuting to critical acclaim, the 6-part series quickly shot to Lifetime's #1 most downloaded and socially engaged property across all A&E networks." End quote. However, this wasn't the only notorious angle Moore was working. Moore became known as a trauma vulture after she cozied up to the Long Island serial killer's wife and started a GoFundMe for her.
After architect Rex Huerman was charged with murdering 3 women, Melissa Moore's sense of compassion led her to set up a GoFundMe page for the Huerman family. Now that's led to an extraordinary encounter, a get-together at the family's home on Long Island.
I just embraced her and gave her a hug, stroked her hair and said, it's all going to be okay.
As we previously stated, Melissa Moore was looking to get her big break as a true crime superstar, and working the Long Island serial killer family angle was another possibility that would catapult her to the next level. However, when Moore got the big break with Gypsy, she failed to investigate Gypsy's case. She failed to seek the truth. Why? Melissa Moore did not have the connections to craft a series like The Act, the Hulu series, which was produced without Gypsy's cooperation. The only play Moore had to get her big break was to cultivate the relationship with Gypsy, like a big sister, those weekly prison phone calls, and hope that she could talk Gypsy into following in her footsteps. Just as Melissa had morphed from the daughter of an infamous serial killer into this hero and advocate for survivors, Moore would urge Gypsy to follow that same track.
Family, about my father, and parts of it were true, but not all of it. And so I understood Gypsy's position of what it's like when everybody takes the stage and tells a story that you lived, and so I wanted to give her that. I wanted to empower her to tell her own story, because I have since found it very empowering for myself to share my own story so that I could connect with other survivors. And I know that's what Gypsy's mission is going to be, is advocacy and connecting with other survivors.
Additionally, Gypsy would make a lot of cash if she would agree to continue to tell her story, and Moore would be the one to make that happen. In fact, Moore claimed the whole world loves Gypsy so much, we all just want to protect her.
I want to protect her like everybody. I think we all feel that unity as a country, as a world, for protecting Gypsy because of what she's endured.
Moore rightly sensed, after talking to Gypsy for hours on end, that Gypsy hated any documentary that she did not control. Gypsy's arrogance and hubris shows in the ebook. Gypsy writes, quote, "I am not thankful at all for how the act ripped me from my private life to a public existence. I have never seen the act. I was not consulted or compensated for a show that made actor Joey King a household name." Gypsy added, "Here I was in my prison uniform eating my disgusting prison food while Hollywood celebrated itself. All I could think was, this girl tried to play me, and I had no control over it." End quote. Moore co-authored that book and was willing to forgo any investigation and report Gypsy's story as the truth. Why? The ebook wasn't fact-checked, and Gypsy's memoir, another Melissa Moore project, will be more of the same. These books are just a ridiculous fiction by Gypsy and Moore, who signs her name to the project to give it credibility. The books are actually written by a ghostwriter named Michelle Matricioni, who gets all the info straight from Gypsy and more. So much to Moore's chagrin, what Gypsy really wants to do is be a beauty fashion influencer and vlogger. She has zero interest in being an advocate. Not only would it be phony and inauthentic, but reports are Gypsy is described as extremely lazy. Nadatha Walker is a TikTok creator who is heavily into real prison reform work. She also happened to be in prison with Gypsy. Nadatha is incensed by Gypsy's so-called advocacy work, which is really never manifested.
And did that experience in prison highlight the fact that you want to be an influence for change?
Absolutely. I feel like there is a lot of positive change that could happen if given the ability. And so I think that there is a lot of things in our justice system that needs to be addressed. So I am an advocate for prison reform, but also
yeah, talk about that, because you say in and out of prison, your platform you're using right now to really spread the message that there needs to be change and there is hope, as you were mentioning. But talk about your time in prison and the...
Oh, girl, I seen it. I seen it. Please name one thing that you've used your platform for to advocate for prison reform. You know why it makes me mad? Here's why it makes me mad, is because, you know what, I got out of prison and I changed my life and I started caring about other people, and more so than that, I started doing prison reform. I know what it looks like. I know what advocacy looks like. I know what losing sleep at night because you care so much about people looks like. I know what getting up at 2 o'clock in the morning because somebody's in relapse after they got out of prison looks like. Do you know what that looks like? No, you don't have a freaking clue. This is not the face of prison reform. This is not the face of advocacy. And I don't care how much PR you do. I'm going to say it and say it and say it until something's done about it. You know what? Throw away the whether she's innocent, guilty. I don't even care about that. It's the fact that you're lying about doing the work that the ones down here on the ground getting our hands dirty are doing. And you ain't. See, now you done made me mad. Here and there, I thought, okay, I can surely just walk away from this. It's whatever. She doesn't matter. But it's so much more than that now. Do you know where I'm on my way to right now? Asheville. Do you know who I've got with me? 3 people straight out of prison are still on parole to help people in other communities. And what are you doing? You're sitting on the news with your fancy clothes and your fancy dress, pretending to be something that you're not. We can go back to your social media platform and there's not one thing, not one, of you advocating for anything except for yourself. Your new trends, your new shoes, your Lululemons and some cute white kids, your Kim K vibes. Meanwhile, I'm rocking a shirt that I made myself because it means something, some old Nikes and a pair of freaking sweatpants. Been driving for 5 hours, didn't get to fly first class. While you're lying. While you get all the pats on the back, while you get to be on the news and give a very vague answer for exactly what is it you're doing for advocacy? Well, there are good women and men out there that are busting their butts in this field. Busting their butts, okay? You don't freaking care. You know what's crazy? I can think of so many organizations with people in it that have certified peer support, meaning that they've went through it, they've lived that life of addiction and came out on the other side, and they are working so hard night and day with people, and they don't get the recognition they deserve. Gypsy, you're a liar. And now I'm going to use my voice to make sure everybody knows that you are a liar and taking credit for something that you know absolutely nothing about. You had to go all the way to LA just to kind of get somebody to cover you in a good light. I don't know why it makes me so freaking mad, but it just makes me so mad and sick to my stomach. Probably because it's something that I'm passionate about in my line of work. You're full of it, man. I hope you get what you have coming to you. If I got to pay to promote this just to keep it going so everybody knows, I sure will. But hey, when everybody else finds out, if you want to actually find out what it looks like to advocate, remember, it's a messy, selfless line of work. And quite frankly, I don't think you're cut out for it.
Nadatha isn't the only voice angered by Gypsy's actions since she left prison. When Gypsy and her boyfriend Ken Urker appeared on the Vile Files, netizens were on fire in the comments section. In fact, we couldn't find one positive remark out of approximately 2,900 comments for Gypsy Rose. YouTube channel Sir Morbid X posted a video going over the most popular comments.
I don't even need to watch this garbage to know for a fact that she lied more than a handful of times. You need to stop giving this monster a platform, and I'm not even kidding. I wouldn't call it a healthy choice to run off for the weekend, cheat on your husband, get pregnant, and jump into another relationship while still married. Gypsy's husband, Ryan Anderson, is allowed to talk about his marriage and what he's going through on his platform.
Gypsy seems to be upset over the decline of her popularity. Over on TMZ, Gypsy was asked to weigh in on the Menendez brothers' possible release. Gypsy made it about herself and indulged in some self-pity. Quote, She worries society's building them up, the brothers, only to tear them down, just like she says they've done to her, end quote. Melissa Moore's influence on Gypsy is hard to measure. We do know speaking to Gypsy every week for over 5 years put Gypsy on this road where she believes she can transform into a celebrity. However, Melissa Moore failed to understand that Gypsy will always be infamous as the woman who plotted her own mother's demise and manipulated a disabled man to do her dirty work. Melissa Moore and Gypsy found in each other a common denominator. They were willing to forego their own moral compass to push a false narrative to create books and a TV series for wealth and fame. One philosopher wrote, quote, "Wealth is like seawater. The more we drink, the thirstier we become. And the same is true of fame." End quote. Thanks for watching Becca Scoops. If you got this far, please like and share. And don't forget to leave us a comment. Thanks again.